Yes.
And how did that influence
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily like we had, like painting sculptures in the house or we're going to the DIA and things like that. Both of my parents were really good drafts people, people who drew as I was growing up. My mother more so, I'd say on like the illustrative side. I was constantly seeing her draw cartoons and magical, fantastical things. I don't know if you remember the TV Guide, which is a thing that used to would tell us what was coming on TV. But you walk around the house and you'd see like the old TV guides. My mother would have tons of doodles like over everything, and like from letters and like space and animals and cartoons. It was really cool to see. And then my dad, he designs like show cars and race cars, and so he sort of draws in that automotive sort of tech isometric style. And so I literally grew up kind of seeing that. And both my parents, growing up in Highland Park in the 80s, where, like drugs, crack, and things like that were really prevalent in the streets. So my family constantly made sure I had like pencils and crayons and things like that to draw with. And it's really cool to like have been inspired that way.
Yeah, so
Sorry. Oh, sorry, 1 second, Chris. I'm just going to move an inch or two to the right. Perfect. I know it's
Wait, that's my
or left.
my left. Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and then if we look here.
Okay.
Cool. There we go.
Cool.
Cool.
All right.
do you still have any of those TV guides?
No, no, a long time ago.
Yeah. I love that doodling, just to be as a young person and to see and be surrounded by creative people, I'm sure it's infectious.
Yeah, but I even do it to this day. Like if sometimes I would just be unconscious. Like if I'm on the phone, odds are I'm gonna start drawing if I'm talking to you. And then when I look up around my house, I have drawings on little pieces of paper everywhere. At the school where I teach at, on my desk, on post-its, on like the back of books. So clearly I get it from my parents.
What about the themes of your work? Tell me about the themes of your work.
Well, the majority thematically, my work typically focuses on the intersection of politics, pop culture, history, and particularly what it means to be an American, usually from a black or a black queer perspective. I didn't used to be that into politics, but around the time I graduated from grad school when George Bush was president, and that was sort of like me becoming an adult and really realizing how politics affects me personally and really being able to feel it. And so when I started to become a maker and think about the type of work that I wanted to make work which really focused on something that I think that's really important to me, but I also know is definitely important to the public at large. And so I tend to focus on sort of like social issues or thinking about how we as a people can make the world a better place or how to interrogate some of the problems that we have.
This has kind of been a theme of our ongoing conversations, but I want to ask this kind of bluntly. How does art address social issues?
Well, I'd say, how does art address social issues? Well, as a visual artist, I'm not a politician. I'm not somebody who can sign legislature or things like that. But Frederick Douglass said, inevitably, all art is propaganda in a way. And because we live in such for me, this is just my thought process. We live in such a image-obsessed society, and people are really attracted to images. And I think that particularly like your images or your actions or your sculptures and those things that can be categorized as art, those are things I think can really, really engage the public, maybe in a way that they might not even be privy to it, but like once they engage it, hopefully like really effective art, it can make people think differently about the world that they live in. Like I personally believe like that's my goal, to just interpret the world in a way that a layman might not have otherwise realized that's what it is, and it's my hope that it changes some minds.
Why was it important for you to participate in the Environment?
Well, I participated in the first one, and that was a really, really, sort of enlightening experience because I had never been around such a large cohort of queer artists, or specifically just queer artists in and of themselves. Like I'd never been in a show that was, that's not true. I've been in one show that was exclusive, I would say, to like queer or gay artists. But in terms of knowing Patrick Burton, the curator for a few years, and him discussing his vision with me about the show, the first time I was wondering like how, because my work was just highly political and did not necessarily focus on queer issues, but I was wondering like how my work would fit in the context of it. And through conversations, knowing the ways that I had engaged work not more in a, I don't know how you can say stereotypically flamboyant, hyper colorful way, but I dealt more with sort of the hyperbole as well as some of the, I don't know, political or social issues we've gone through. This time around, considering I was just coming off of a solo show in Florida, which addressed Florida's attack on the queer community as I see it, this was like the perfect timing. I think like just a perfect way for me to constantly keep my work, the integrity of what I do, but still be able to participate in something where I was able to fellowship with people who were like-minded.
Tell me a bit about your piece, Forever Young. You start working on this, and more importantly, why?
So the piece Forever Young, in 2016, when the Post nightclub shooting happened, I would say the Post nightclub shooting as well as the Sandy Hook shooting, those were probably the two main public shootings that affected me the most. Sandy Hook mostly because I am a teacher and children really mean a lot to me. But then the Post nightclub shooting, the fact that this happened in a gay club, which is supposed to be a safe space for our people, it just was really tragic to me, and it really sort of like sent shockwaves through my mind. And I would say even up my soul and how I think about just going out in public now. You know, I was telling somebody like, I hadn't really realized or thought about it, but I don't go out to clubs as often as I used to prior to that. Because, you know, this type of mass violence can happen at any time. Don't get me wrong, that's not always at the forefront of my mind, but I just noticed that there was sort of, I don't know, like a connection here. In terms of the piece itself, I've been wanting to do some type of commemorative piece for a few years now. Not necessarily the way that it ended up now, but in some way, shape, or form. And I've attempted to make something about it in various capacities. I've tried to partner with different organizations and do it, but nothing ever came to fruition. And last summer I was doing a residency in up in Goodhart, Michigan, which is like about 45 minutes south of the UP. And I was just in the woods by myself making a body of work. And throughout my research, this kind of came to me, and I was thinking like, man, this would be a really meditative piece to sort of like just do all 49 portraits, considering like being a figurative artist, I love drawing, but to tackle this project. And so for a good 2 weeks up there, I was just doing research, like finding images, reading about the people, seeing, you know, exactly what it was like. And before I got too sad, reading all of the stories, I just kind of took that energy and just like used it to start the project. And then I just started drawing portraits one by one, and I didn't give myself a deadline. I wasn't trying to do them really fast. Some portraits were done quicker than others. Some took days, some took like a couple of hours. Some were approached with different styles, but nevertheless, I was always thinking about like the integrity of what it would be like to see these people in mass. And what I wanted to do was like do them as individual portraits so that I could pay a tribute to them as individuals. But when you see the piece in mass with all of the colors which are reflective of the LGBT flag, I wanted to create something that was really celebratory for the queer community. And nevertheless, reminds you that we do have to be careful because we do live in a world where people are still hell-bent on trying to harm us. But nevertheless, that doesn't mean that we still can't celebrate and be ourselves. And so, that's a really long answer to how the piece became together.
So, tell me, how did you decide to represent these 49 individuals? Where did you pull the images from to create these portraits?
A lot of the images, well, they all came from the internet, but from various sources. Some came from the New York Times website, some came from People Magazine. These people, you know, a lot of them had, well, the vast majority of them had social media accounts, and so I could actually go to their accounts and see images that they had taken themselves, and in that way you get to kind of see how people curate themselves throughout their lives. And I found that to be a very powerful way to draw source material from. And so just various sources to kind of get images which I think were indicative and really sort of captured the spirit of the ways that I had read about these individuals being. So that's kind of how it came together.
What was it like for you to spend so much time with these people, both as an artist and also as a member of their community?
Oddly enough, like you might think that it was sad because I am drawing people who are deceased, and this can be challenging to take on. Drawing is sort of an aesthetic practice, and to take this on, it can be overwhelming emotionally. But one of the things that I was telling somebody about this the other day about doing a project like this. One of my favorite painters, this guy named Vincent Desiderio, he said that if you want to make a piece that's emotional, you have to be very logical and analytical about it. But if you want to make a piece that's very analytical, you need to be extremely emotional about it. And so when I started this piece, while I would say the emotional weight of it did kind of come down on me, I had to kind of step back and detach myself away from it. And then as I was creating the pieces, every once in a while, the emotions would kind of creep in, but for the most part, I tried to keep a sort of, I don't know, sort of like careful distance away from the story of the overall piece in order to execute it, so that when I was actually executing the individual portraits, I was executing them the best way I possibly could. But you know, and then when I stepped back, the emotion came later, you know. So
that makes sense. It's almost like when you're sitting there, shovel in hand, with a task in front of you.
yeah.
It's kind of like that's what you see. It's not until you take a step back that you are able to inhale.
Yeah, and I kind of do that. I would say with this my work anyway. Like my paintings, my drawings, they're pretty labor intensive, and so it would be challenging to be really sad for like 3 months while you're working on a painting, you know. So it helps to detach a little bit, you know.
Were there any stories that really stuck out to you, or any portraits that were particularly challenging, or that really resonated with you?
I'm trying to think. One person was a captain in the army, and thinking about sort of how the army has had this sort of like history with queer culture and queer people, that really fascinated me how decorated the soldier was. One individual being like a really starts like gay activist and like really fighting for the rights of gay people and making, you know, and like very anti-violence, and to think about like this act that happened to them. There were just a number, like tons, like a number of stories. People who were fathers of, you know, gay houses and things like that, who took care of tons of, you know, like tons of younger queer people, and so like that was just a lot of loss. Everybody kind of had like an individual story that was really, really special, and I mean, I think that's indicative of people in general. But when you compartmentalize it down that way, I couldn't say that one was more dramatic than another. It just was a really, really, I was really fascinated by how the lives of these people lived, you know.
This was originally intended, though, as part of a different exhibition, one in Florida called America as a Problem.
Yeah.
Why did you end up deciding to save this work for this exhibit?
When I finished as I was concluding the work for the exhibition, I had to send stuff to Miami. It came to me, I was like, well, I have enough work for this exhibition. And the exhibition itself, which does tackle these issues of what's happening in Florida, and this piece itself would have been tailor-made for it. But as I was getting close to the deadline, I thought that the pieces that I had in the show told that story well enough. Including this or not including it wouldn't have helped it or made it better or worse. And so, not only that, even when I was working on the pieces, I was posting like a couple of the drawings online as I was completing them. And Patrick reached out to me like over a year ago, even when it was still in progress, and asked me about the piece. And I told him, well, it was meant for Florida, but I said even if it goes to Florida, if someone was to purchase it, I would just tell them it's under the stipulation that it has to be in Mighty Queer. So it was going to be in here, whether it went to Florida or not. But as the work got closer to it, you know, I ended up telling Patrick, nope, I say this exclusively for the Mighty Queer show. So Detroit will be the first place it's shown.
What does the title of the exhibit, Mighty Queer, mean to you?
Well, I often find that I just kind of had an issue the other day with something like anti-gay, like rhetoric, like online. But I often, even in terms of like in defense of any sort of like marginalized group, I'm always trying to, you know, I want to point out to people how we are the exact reflection of you, right? Like the differences that you're trying to point out are so minuscule relative to the myriad of ways that we are similar. We're all humans. Humans do the exact same thing, you know. We just wear different clothes when we do it. And so like looking at this exhibition, to see that, you get to see the myriad of ways that queer culture definitely reflects what's happening like in the world around us. Whether it's somebody who wants to dress up, like a drag queen is really flamboyant and they're dressing up to be pretty, but so does a supermodel, so does a celebrity or a pop star, right? It's just the context that these things are very similar. And that's just one example that I would say that. So like to me, that's kind of what that statement means.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the context is
Yeah. And look, Jesus, look at the clothes they wear. Right?
Um, but as a born and bred Detroiter, is that right?
Yes.
Detroiter.
Yeah, yeah.
As a born and bred Detroiter, what do you hope this exhibit says or shows about the city where you're from?
That Detroit isn't just a motor city. We are, I do love that as an art hub, the city, the reputation over the last few years has started to gain some traction. But one thing I love to show that hopefully this exhibition shows that we're even open-minded. You know, when you think about a queer exhibition like this, particularly at this scale, you might think of like places that have huge queer populations, like San Francisco. You may think of it in maybe New York. But thinking about putting it in a place like the Motor City, which kind of would make people do a double take. But I think that it's that double take that kind of makes it special, you know, and it's important. And when you come here, I think the cool thing about the show, even though it brings together, it curates a bunch of artists from different places around the world, as well as in Detroit. When you get here, you kind of still, I don't know, it still feels like that do-it-yourself, get up and grind type of spirit that Detroiters have. And even talking to some of the artists in here, what their processes are, what it's like to be artists, like where they're from, you start to see sort of a connection in that way. And so that's kind of like what I hope it, you know, like why I think it's important for it to be here in Detroit and how it shines and show like, I mean, there's a lot to Detroit. We're very multifaceted, and this exhibition is really dope, and this is part of that.
What's kept you there as an artist? You had moments where you said, oh, I should move to New York, I should move to LA, or I should move elsewhere.
I lived in New York, I moved back. So, you know, that is that. Even when I lived in New York, I constantly missed Detroit. When I left, I like living here. I left to go to grad school, you know. I did live, you know, just to kind of have some adventures. I stayed away a little bit, but I still always considered Detroit home. And even, you know, like moving back here, it's just, there's so many things to do. The city is constantly growing and it's coming back. It's somewhat affordable, but as we know, that is changing like rapidly, but still relative to other places, you know, like it still is. It's a black city, and I absolutely love that, you know. Even the gallery that I'm in right now, my favorite hangout spot is a few feet away from here. And so, like, it's just a beautiful and like great place. We'd be here for like hours if I had to talk about all the cool things about Detroit that I really, really love. But there's a reason that the draft is here. There's a reason where, you know, like the DIA was voted the #1 museum in the country, and that you start this. The reason that we just had that huge concert with the revitalization of the train station. You know, like Detroit is a really, really big thriving city, and throughout the years we've gotten a really bad reputation, but you can't stop progress, and you know, we've always been this cool and this great, and so now the world is just catching on, you know. Yeah.
And then lastly, can you tell me a bit about the latest series you're working on that involves horses?
Oh, yeah. So I'm working on, it's still kind of keeping the queer thing, but not so strict. So I'm working on like a series of large scale drawings, paintings. I haven't decided they're all gonna be that big. I'm just going with the flow because I'm an artist, and sometimes it's fun just to do that. But mostly so far large scale equestrian portraits, because traditionally in art, equestrian portraits have been saved for like the rich, the high elite, and this shows like, you know, they come off as sort of like status symbols. But I'm thinking about like the ownership of horses or equestrian portraits is sort of like, horses is a metaphor for social mobility, both upward as well as lateral. And not only seeing someone on a horse does it evoke sort of like that sense of that this is an important person, but I'm taking it away from the aristocracy and more or less ascribing importance to people who are writers, who are intellects. I just finished a drawing yesterday, a large scale drawing of James Baldwin on a horse. I'm almost finished with a large scale painting of Octavia E. Butler on a horse. And then I have like a few other things sort of like on the easel that are in the works. But really right now I'm working through it. It's about kind of just showing sort of, paying tribute to sort of like these great black archetypes, but also kind of just talk about mobility, like I said, yeah.
When you think about the setup for this entire exhibit, I want to ask you a question, and I want to do it in a way that's not clunky.
Mm-hmm.
Do you identify as a queer artist or as an artist who is queer, and does that matter?
That's an awesome question. I don't know if I've ever had to think of it like that. I would probably say more an artist who happens to be queer. Because like I said, except for like the last couple of years, my work has not focused on like exclusively queer issues, right? Where it has, it's been intersecting with issues in the Black community per se. This is the first time where I've kind of been pulled away from the Blackness and focused again, there's definitely intersection, but the focus or the lens more or less is sort of like queer. And so, I mean, I've been out since I'm 19, so people know, but if you've like seen my work, that wouldn't have been the thing that comes off, you know? And even to the show in Florida that I just did, like, once you get there and you start to, you know, like you get there and you see the work and you start to hear what it's about, then you understand the context of it from that perspective. But that's not even intentional, that's just the way that I work, you know? Like all of my work, I like it to be multivalent in that, you know, it has multiple meanings and multiple ways it can be, you know, observed. And so that's a long way to answer the question of, I would say that I'm an artist who just happens to be queer.
And that's, to me, the true beauty of art, right?
Yeah.
It's always a Rorschach test for all
Yeah.
of us. And it's also a testament to the conceit of this exhibit.
Indeed.
You have a collection of individuals who are working around a centrally organized idea, but you as the artist can express those ideas as you see fit, and you as a viewer or participant can interpret and respond to those pieces as you see fit.
Indeed.
Like I'm soft power art forever. Maya, anything else I should have asked or missed?
This is so great. Just a couple. Chris is used to me having follow-ups. One thing that we actually discussed was it wasn't just a shooting that targeted a queer nightclub, but it was also a safe space with queer people of color specifically.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if you want to comment on that at all,
Yeah.
and no problem if not. But you know, just wanted to raise that.
Yeah, so there was a time that of the many areas that basically collided with the pulse of shooting. One of them was that not only was this a gay nightclub, but this was a safe space for people of color who happen to be gay or allies of gay.
Yeah, I mean, reading a lot into the tragedy itself, I think the tragedy in and of itself is enough. The individual who perpetrated the crime was a person of color. So I think that was the least of like the reasons that particular thing like happened there. We kind of talked about it. I don't know. I know the media has one narrative for what happened, but I heard conflicting narratives about sort of what that was. But in the end, these people lost their lives, you know, and 53 other people were injured as a result of it. So I haven't really dwelled that much on the color.
Well, and that's what's, I think it's striking about the exhibit America has a problem, right? Because when you're thinking about it, it's multifaceted. And I think one of the many tragedies of the situation we're in is like, you know, in this case, there was an individual that targeted this place for his reasons, but like, pick your space, synagogue, school, nightclub, you know, country western concert. It's like, you know, at the end of the day, the roads are leading to kind of one organizing thing.
Yeah, the people who perpetrate these types of crimes, I mean, they know what they're doing. They know where to go. It's sort of like the safe space is the target because you know that those people will coalesce there, and it ends up becoming like one of the most sacrilegious things they can do because of how they desecrate these particular spaces. And it's a real particular type of, you know, evil's more of a religious side, but that type of cruelty is an aspect of the human condition, and it's really, really weird to see how just certain people be consumed with so much hate and so much vitriol that they want to do this to other people.
But I also do love and I applaud everything. It's like the idea that revenge is living. Revenge is living your life and living your life with pride. And there's that famous quote, "Be the living." You know, it's like that's ultimately.
Because even though the tragedy happened, it doesn't stop us from dancing. It doesn't stop us from still living our lives and being the beautiful people that we are. You know what I mean? You gotta have moxie. You gotta overcome things with spirit. You know?
And creating artwork with it.
Indeed. people to take away from the piece. Don't get me wrong, I want to make sure that people don't forget the tragedy about what happened. But I'm not trying to create a piece to make people sad or make people cry and fall out in the gallery in of itself. That's one of the reasons I made it very colorful and sort of like did the portraits in a variety of colors reminiscent of the LGBTQ flag, because when you come into it, I want you to feel happy. I want it to be beautiful. I almost want the color to overwhelm you in terms of its joy. But then if you find out what it is, which it's kind of, I've seen the way some people have responded to it, it may pull you back, but at the same time, it's my goal that those two things are constantly buttoned up against each other. Yeah, it's okay to remember the tragedy in and of itself, but also enjoy the beauty of who these people are. See how like the immenseness of it. And so that's the type of thing that I'm trying to accomplish. It's challenging to make a commemorative piece about such a large, heavy loss of life, but it's also even challenging to make that piece something that will make people feel good, and make them think about their own lives and think about like how far we've come and how we're still here and resilient to it.
Yeah. One of my favorite journalism quotes of all time was, "The truth does not change according to our ability to stomach it." And
You tell that to the people outside in America,
yeah,
Jesus.
It's the same idea, right?
Yeah.
It's not the same, a similar Jason idea.
Indeed.
And then last question from me was, you've spoken about how you kind of only recently turned to sort of queer topics or issues in your art. What sort of motivated you to start doing that, and was it sort of, I guess, the political environment and changes there?
So what made me started changing, narrowing my focus more on queer issues as opposed to like the intersection of race, politics, pop culture, and these things. I would say politically, definitely what I saw over the last 2 years happening in Florida about very specific laws targeted at the LGBT community, as well as laws targeted with revisionist history of like Black history in that way. And it was around that time when Florida's governor, Ron DeSantis, was in the running to be a president, so he was really sort of like a political celebrity at the time. And you started to see this sort of real hardcore, conservative sort of like pushing through the legislature to target, drag queens can't be near the schools, as if people are holding drag shows in schools. People can't teach these types of books in schools. You can't, what else was it? They can't have that bridge it's like a large bridge there they turn on the pride color flags like every year, and this year like they're not gonna do it. It's just tons of like targeted sort of like things, particularly in the legislature, like I said, revisionist things towards Black history. And as I started to see these things like over and over again, it was sort of like a barrage that constantly showed up via my like news feed in terms of like CNN or like those sort of pundits. And I was having this show in Florida, like it was coming, like it was already in the books, and I was kind of working on some other kind of work for it, or like traditionally like sort of what I do, but I don't know, that really got under my skin, where I started to see this really sort of like targeted mission against people who are like me. And so when I was going, I was going to have this show in Florida, and I really didn't feel right about just having a regular show there and that is indicative of my work without speaking to these issues. And so I took the time and really thought, like I said, once again at that residency, when I thought of this piece, this was the first piece I thought of for the show, even though it didn't end up in the show. And then from there, all of the other pieces like just sort of came to me vis-a-vis like sort of research. But it's definitely a reaction to what I see happening like in government and how it was intentionally trying to target the queer community. And I felt the need to address those issues in a way like artistically, which could draw people in, but also something that has an intellectual foundation so that it can be backed up with text and research, so that people can go in and see, like objectively, these things are wrong. Like why are you targeting a whole specific like group of people? People are hungry. Target that. Feed the hungry, help the homeless population. There's a myriad of things to do other than just mess with queer people.
Mm.
Even if it's like totally stripped down, why are you wasting our precious time with this?
Yeah, and some people, I get it, it's cyclical. These people learn these behaviors from their parents, and they they learn prejudice, they learn to be biased against people, they, you know, or they learn to have their phobias in that way. Even though it's kind of a weird cognitive dissonance because they know there's really no real threat behind it, right? You know, you pass a law to say that their drag queens can't put on drag shows within 100 feet of a school, but there's no precedent for drag shows being put on within 100 feet of school. You know, and it's these types of weird things where I wish even the conservative voter or like whoever backs up that person, I wish they could take a step back and really look at it and think like, yeah, this is kind of a law for a crime that does not exist, you know, and that's not a crime in the first place to do that. And there's so much, like I said, again, we'd be here all like hours just talking about like the laws that are being passed and targeted specifically at the queer communities, you know, young trans kids.
I lied. I have one final question.
Okay, are you good? The light
Oh,
now?
oh, shoot.
Okay.
1 second.
Yeah. The light went out, sorry.
Thanks for noticing that. I didn't even realize.
Gotta change the bulb.
Yeah. It will take 1 second. This is a great conversation.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.